Imagine welcoming a loved one to your dinner table only to realize too late that the meal was their last. Mary Clement, a seemingly unassuming young woman, harbored a chilling secret. She was slowly poisoning her own family. Her story is one of manipulation, hidden compulsions, and a dark psychological urge that led to multiple deaths. But what makes her case even more unsettling, after escaping suspicion, she disappeared into high society, living out her days as a trusted servant in one of Los Angeles' wealthiest families. How did she get away with it, and what drove her to kill? Let's unravel the twisted mind of Mary Clement. Hello everyone, my name is Aurora. Welcome to my basement where everything is work in progress just like me. Thank you for being here. Let's dive into this story. Mary Clement's story begins in the quiet town of Dubuque, Iowa, where her family had settled after immigrating from Luxembourg in the 1970s. Yes, you heard me right. Europe was so poor, people emigrated even from Luxembourg to the US back in the 19th century. Mary was born into a working class household. She was the second of five daughters raised by Michelle and Marguerite Clement. Life in their home was modest but stable, at least from the outside. Unlike her siblings, Mary suffered from a spinal defect that made it difficult for her to walk properly, a condition that left her feeling isolated and different. Despite this, she was described as slender, rather pretty, and always eager to please. But beneath her seemingly mild exterior lurks something far more unsettling. When Michelle and Margarita Clement arrived in the United States in the 1970s, they carried the same dream as countless other immigrants: a fresh start, a chance to build a better life. But the reality was far harsher. Settling in Dubuque, Iowa, a city with a growing immigrant population, the Clements found themselves in a world where opportunity came at a grueling cost. Michelle took on backbreaking labor, likely in the city's booming manufacturing or milling industries, where long hours and low wages barely kept food on the table. Margarite, like most women of her time, was expected to manage the household, raise the children, and contribute however she could, whether through sewing, cleaning, or taking in laundry. It was a life of endless struggle where survival meant sacrifice. And for Mary, the daughter who never quite fit the mold, that struggle may have bred something far darker than simple resentment. As a young woman in the late 19th century, Mary's role was predetermined before even she had a chance to question it. Women were expected to be obedient, hardworking, and above all, self sacrificing, especially in an immigrant family where every pair of hands counted. But Mary's spinal defect set her apart. She couldn't toil like her sisters, couldn't meet the rigid expectations placed upon her, and perhaps most painfully, she couldn't gain her family's approval in the way she so desperately wanted. Feeling like an outsider in her own home, she watched as her siblings fit neatly into their expected roles, while she remained the burden, the one who needed extra care, the one who couldn't contribute. Over time, that isolation could have twisted into something much, much darker. She began to see her family not as loved ones, but as obstacles. Was poisoning them an act of revenge or a desperate attempt to reclaim power in a world that had already decided she was powerless? Consider the alternatives. As the years passed, tragedies seemed to follow the Clements family at an alarming rate. One by one, Mary's loved ones began falling ill. Each death was explained away as illness or bad luck, and no one thought to suspect the quiet, helpful daughter who remained. But there was something chillingly methodical about these tragedies. Every victim had suffered convulsions. a telltale sign of poisoning, yet no alarms were raised. By the time the last body was buried, Mary had managed to eliminate nearly her entire family without a single finger pointed in her direction. How was this even possible, you may wonder? The in the Clement household came in a slow, almost rhythmic pattern, one after another, each victim falling to an unexplained illness that no one questioned too deeply. It started in 1880s when 6-year-old Annie Clement suddenly collapsed with violent convulsions. Her tiny body stiffened. Her breath came in gasp. And then, just as quickly as the sickness came, she was gone. The family mourned, but death was not uncommon in an era where diseases struck without warning. 4 years later, tragedy struck again. Margarita Clement, the matriarch, grew weak and frail before suffering the same agonizing fate. Her death left the family shaken, but there was little time to grieve before 13-year-old Lena followed, her once bright eyes dimming in a matter of days. Then, in 1885, Michel Clement, the father who had worked tirelessly to provide for his family, became the final victim. He convulsed, writhed, and died just like the rest. And yet, no one suspected a thing. With her immediate family gone, the question was, what is going to do Mary now on? Mary moved in with her older sister, Catherine, and her husband, Michel Freres, in Rose Hill, Illinois. It wasn't long before sickness crept into their home as well. Each time Mary cooked, someone fell mysteriously ill. The nausea, the dizziness, the sharp pains, it was all too familiar. Unlike the rest of the Mary's victims, however, Michel Freres had a nagging feeling. Something wasn't right. Every time Mary cooked, someone in the house grew violently ill. At first, he brushed it off as coincidence, but then came the night of the soup. As he brought the spoon to his lips, a strange bitterness lingered on his tongue, something unnatural. His stomach churned, but not from poison, from fear. He examined the bowl more closely and spotted something unusual. Tiny grayish flecks floating just beneath the surface. A dreadful realization set in. Carefully, he set the bowl aside and without a word took a sample to the local doctor. When the results came in, they confirmed his worst fear. It was a powder, a deadly one. Which poison, you might ask? It was indeed arsenic, the silent killer, the poison of choice for those who sought death without suspicion. For centuries, it had been the favored weapon of assassins, royalty, and scorned lovers alike, earning its grim nickname, the inheritance powder. Odorless, tasteless, and easily mixed into food or drink, arsenic left its victims suffering in agony while appearing to die of natural causes. The symptoms were cruel, a slow descent into unbearable pain. It began with nausea and stomach cramps, followed by violent vomiting and diarrhea so severe that dehydration set in quickly. Soon, muscle spasms and seizures would take over as the poison attacked the nervous system. The final stage was horrific, organs failing one by one, the body collapsing from the inside out. In an era where medical science was still primitive, arsenic deaths were easily mistaken for cholera or food poisoning, allowing murderers like Mary Clement to kill in plain sight. But arsenic's legacy stretched back far beyond the 19th century. Ancient Romans used it to dispatch political rivals, and in Renaissance Europe, noblewomen laced gloves and perfumes with it to eliminate enemies with a single touch. It was the so-called a woman's weapon, subtle and efficient, requiring no brute strength, just patience. and the cold calculation to watch someone slowly waste away. For Mary, it was the perfect method, a way to take in control in a world where she had none. The authorities were called, and soon Mary found herself face to face with investigators who had more questions than she had answers. At first, she denied everything, but as pressure mounted, her calm exterior cracked. Eventually, she confessed, not just to poisoning the soup, but to something far worse. She had killed before. One by one, she had watched her family die at her own hand, and no one had ever suspected. Until now, under pressure, she made a shocking confession, admitting that she had poisoned her parents and sisters, though she could not fully explain why. Something inside me made me do it, she reportedly said. But despite the weight of her crimes, the justice system at that time was ill-equipped to handle cases like hers. For reasons still debated today, Mary was only convicted of attempted murder for trying to poison her brother-in-law. Her sentence? Just 1 year in Jolie prison, a mere 12 months behind bars for wiping out or nearly her entire family. And when she was released, she disappeared, vanishing into the world as she had never killed at all. It's crucial to examine the judicial system of that era, how women were perceived within it, and why Mary managed to receive such a lenient sentence. Mary Clement had taken the lives of nearly her entire family, yet when she stood before the law, the punishment she received was shockingly light. Just 1 year in prison for attempted murder. How could that be? Let me know your opinion. In fact, what it seems that the legal system of the late 19th century was vastly different from today, especially when it came to women. Courts at that time often viewed female criminals through a lens of fragility, assuming they were either mentally unstable or easily led astray rather than truly dangerous. Many believed a woman simply wasn't capable of calculated murder. Trials were typically decided by a judge and a jury, but jurors, who were always men, were far more likely to show leniency to a female defendant, especially one who appeared weak or remorseful. I chose this case to be showcased mainly because we hear so many times when women are mistreated by the judicial system and they get tons than the men, but in this case it was the other way around. Women back then rarely faced the full weight of the law unless their crime were seen as particularly heinous or posed a direct threat to the moral fabric of society. So it was more of a perception than actual analysis of the facts. Poisoning, though deadly, was a method associated with secrecy rather than brutality, and without modern forensic evidence, prosecutors struggled to prove her past murders beyond a reasonable doubt. So it was only hearsay. Reasonable doubt could not be accepted in that case. In the end, Mary wasn't convicted for the deaths of her family, only for attempting to poison her brother-in-law. And for that, the system handed her the lightest punishment possible. After serving just 1 year, Mary Clement's life took an unexpected turn. She was released from Jolie prison and vanished from the public eye, her past hidden behind the anonymity of a fresh start. Mary moved to Los Angeles, where she found work as a domestic servant for a wealthy family. To the outside world, she was just another quiet, polite woman who enjoyed wearing elaborate hats and making small talk. Her past, her role in the deaths of her family, was buried deep, tucked away like a forgotten secret. The city, with its bustling streets and ever-changing population, provided a perfect escape. No one knew her real name, and her former crimes were never discovered. What's even more chilling is how she managed to evade severe punishment in the first place. In a time when women were often viewed as fragile and incapable of serious criminal intent, the authorities and even her trial didn't see her as a dangerous killer. Instead, she was treated with a strange kind of sympathy. Poisoning, after all, was seen as a less brutal crime, and with limited forensic evidence available, the case was never fully explored. Mary's ability to blend into high society was a testament to how easily she could leave her past behind, while the justice system, weighed down by outdated views and limited resources, allowed her to slip through the cracks. Mary Clement's actions are a haunting glimpse into the mind of a killer, and understanding her psychological profile requires looking at the behavior of women who poison their victims. Often referred to as female poisoners, these women typically use slow acting toxins like arsenic, which allows them to maintain control over the victims for days or even weeks before the final deadly act. Psychological studies suggest that women who poison may often feel powerless in other areas of their lives, seeking to regain control through the quiet, insidious act of poisoning. Mary's physical condition, her spinal defect, may have made her feel isolated or weak, unable to meet society's expectations for women at that time. She couldn't marry, she couldn't have her own children probably, and therefore she thought this is the only way for her. Poisoning offered her a way to assert power without the need for physical strength, something that made it appealing to those who feel invisible or underestimated. Research into female poisoners also reveals a pattern of emotional or psychological trauma, which could play a role in their actions. Many of these women come from backgrounds where they feel ignored, oppressed, or mistreated, often lashing out at the very people who should be their support systems. In Mary's case, the overwhelming strain of living in a demanding immigrant household, coupled with her physical limitations, may have created a simmering resentment toward her family. We may never know, but the act of poisoning them allowed her not only to take control, but also erase the people she felt trapped by. This combination of psychological factors, emotional repression, and desire for control and a deep sense of isolation helps explain why Mary, like many other women throughout history, chose poison as her weapon of choice. In today's psychological terms, Mary Clement's behavior could be analyzed through several different lenses. One potential diagnosis might be antisocial personality disorder, which is characterized by a lack of empathy, disregard for the rights of others, and manipulative behavior. Mary's calculated poisoning of her family, along with her apparent lack of remorse, could fit this pattern. People with this diagnosis often have a history of deceit and exploitation, traits that Mary exhibited when she manipulated those around her to carry out her crimes without suspicion. It is also possible that Mary could have experienced factitious disorder, in which individuals intentionally harm others or themselves in order to gain attention or sympathy. While there is no direct evidence that Mary sought sympathy in the traditional sense, her need to control the lives and deaths of those around her may suggest a twisted form of this psychological disorder, where the chaos she created could have given her a sense of dominance and control. Ultimately, without a full assessment, these diagnoses are speculative but reflect common patterns observed in female poisoners. Today's understanding of psychology offers more insight into the complex mental state that might have driven someone like Mary Clement to commit such horrific acts. Mary Clement's story is a chilling reminder of how easily someone can slip through the cracks of the justice system, especially when the truth is buried beneath layers of secrecy. She killed nearly her entire family, but because of the limited forensic tools and the way women were often treated with leniency, she received only a light sentence. Her ability to blend into society afterward as if nothing had happened shows how deeply some people can bury their dark pasts and manipulate the world around them. It's a terrifying thought. How could someone so close to you be capable of such monstrous acts without raising suspicion? Ultimately, the case of Mary Clement highlights a critical issue: the flaws in the justice system, especially when it comes to gender bias and the treatment of women. In her time, women were often seen as incapable of violent crime, and that misconception allowed Mary to escape the severe punishment she truly deserved. As we look back at this case, we are reminded of the dangers of ignoring the signs of manipulation and the importance of constantly asking the world around us. Thank you very much for watching and being here with me. I wish you to take care of yourself, and if you are still here by this time, please be aware that you are the ones who encourage me to continue, and I thank you very much for it, and thank you for considering subscribing. Bye.